Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Fatboyz Dynasty podcast, hosted by the Fantasyholics Podcast Network. Again, once as always, Brant live on YouTube, coming back for another pretty exciting episode. Now, I know this is something that you and I talked about briefly on last week's episode, that rookie rankings right now really just aren't it for you and I, just because landing spot means so much for a lot of these guys. But I feel like we'd be, Brant, doing a disservice to the fantasy community and the Fatboyz faithful listeners if we didn't come out with our too early 2023 rookie rankings. Just real quick rundown of top five guys at each position for fantasy relevancy. Obviously, if you're looking for defensive stuff, you're going to have to turn over to our good buddy Seth on Defense Wins Championships, or Defense Wins Fantasy, on the Fantasyholics Podcast Network over there. Seth's putting out all the good IDP content. I'm sure he's got loads of insightful stuff to tell you, as well as Brant and I, if we decide to dip our toes back into the IDP world again on some of these incoming rookies. So, Brant, I know some of these names for you and I are going to be very similar at certain positions. Maybe at some other spots we'll have the same five names, just in completely different order. But this really is the best time of the year where you find your my guys, if you will, guys that you're ready to stand on a hill and fight for. And I'm sure those will start to emerge here. I think I've snuck one of my guys in already this week that I'm not sure you'll have in your rankings. But you and I always tend to find guys that we're really willing to fall on a sword for. And I'm definitely interested to find out with the rest of the world who your guy is this year.
Yeah, so far I've been going through this. I really haven't dove head first into finding my guy. I know the last few years UCLA running back and that trend in this year, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, this is our way too early rank. Some of these guys will probably stay in the top five, but it will fluctuate where they're going to be. I've already moved from the time we broke down some of these guys. I've already moved a few of them around in my rankings. So I mean, it's going to be pending, landing spot. And it really with the quarterbacks, the biggest thing is going to be what kind of weapons do they have around them? Are they going to be an instant starter? Running backs. Who's in front of them? Wide receivers. Are they a slot wide out? Are they going to a slot needy team? So it's really going to be a question of how this is going to go. I'm ready to dive into it. I dove, didn't go too in depth with who and all the other stats. The stats are out there. You got your 40s and their pro day work. That's out there for everybody. But some people just want to hear what the Fatboyz got to say, and maybe they're at the bottom of our fifth rankings. Maybe there's a few names that people haven't heard of. And I know, I'm sure when it comes to the quarterbacks, I'm sure the top four are probably roughly the same, maybe moved around just a little bit, but maybe that fifth name somebody hasn't heard of or something.
Yeah. Again, with these rookie rankings, I could list every stat, every 40 time, everything else. And it's all well and good until one of these running backs ends up behind, Jonathan Taylor or Kenneth Walker, or something of that nature, or one of these wide receivers goes someplace with a terrible quarterback. And, I could be hyping up some guy at the wide receiver 3 spot. And then after his landing spot goes, he could be wide receiver 7 come draft time. So definitely going to be some fluctuation. It'll be interesting, Brant. We may have to revisit these early rankings after the actual NFL draft, which I know you'll be representing the Fatboyz at this year in person. But we may have to come back to these and just see how far off we were, or how close we were on some of these guys. Obviously, I think the cream rises to the top, and at some of these positions, it's going to be awful hard for the cream not to be at the top, regardless of landing spot. But without further ado, Brant, if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's jump right into the quarterback position. Who do you have at number 5? Let's go number 5 at each of these, and then we'll work up.
You want to start an argument right here, right off the bat, because at number 5, I have Hendon Hooker. I know he may be missing his majority of his rookie year. He may be later in the draft, but his rushing upside is tremendous. I know he can throw the ball, get it downfield. He's probably going to have to sit behind a veteran for his first year, and rehab that injury. But I absolutely love his his rushing upside and his playmaking ability. So I actually moved him into number 5 for right now. I know a lot of the ones below him don't really have that rushing upside. So I have Hendon Hooker at number 5.
Yeah, you're not going to find any argument out of me. I know I don't feel as confident about Hendon Hooker as I do some of these other guys for generating wins in the NFL, but for fantasy relevancy, which is what the people listen to our voices for, is for fantasy. Obviously, there's no GMs in the NFL calling me going, what do you think of this quarterback? But Hendon Hooker, just like you said, the rushing upside's there. He's got a pretty strong arm. He put that on display in the SEC several times this year. And listen, we've kind of seen it in years past, and it's kind of coming to the forefront a little bit too here recently with guys like Trey Lance and Zach Wilson. Those quarterbacks that are coming into the NFL a little bit battle tested are the ones that are sticking through and having some kind of a relevant career, whereas you see guys like Trey Lance, which there's been injuries, and I still hold out hope for him, but we haven't seen it yet. Zach Wilson just doesn't look like the answer. Obviously, that's why the Jets are so enamored with everything Aaron Rodgers right now. So I do think the level of competition he played in the SEC will help him. And again, just like you mentioned, the wheels are there, Brant, and we all know running quarterbacks are pretty hot commodity when it comes to fantasy lineups at this point. So, all right, moving right along. Number 4, who do you have at number 4? We seem to be having a little bit of technical difficulties with Brant here. We'll have to have him chime back in here in just a second with who his number 4 guy is. For me, number 4 is, again, when I'm looking at this and I'm doing these guys based on fantasy relevancy, Will Levis is a guy that I think, obviously, he's of the top 4. He is still in there, the better prospects, the guys that you'd expect to go in the round 1. Absolute cannon of an arm, very intelligent, but that's kind of it. There's no special speed. Not going to do anything astronomical outside of the pocket. Just going to be a very run-of-the-mill average pocket passing quarterback, which is those guys can be extremely successful when you look at guys like Jimmy Garoppolo, prime example, Tom Brady, who wasn't overly fast, Matt Ryan, those guys, they can still have amazing fantasy numbers and amazing fantasy seasons. So obviously, that changes some things there. So definitely just for me outside the top 3, just because he doesn't have that rushing upside and that some of these other guys do have. So let me check real quick and see where Brant is. All right, so moving along, for me at number 3, I'm not sold necessarily on the hype of everything that is Anthony Richardson at this point. I do think Anthony Richardson is a guy that if he falls to the Colts, which is what a lot of people think is going to happen with Anthony Richardson, his draft stock obviously goes up for me if he lands there. I know the wheels are great, everything else, but when you talk about his college tape and his college career, 1 touchdown to 1 interception ratio for the better part of the year for him. He did have a couple games with some little bit better numbers, but nothing astronomical, nothing crazy. And I know he's a combine champion, if you will. And at this point, for fantasy numbers, I think the numbers are going to be pretty good just because you do have that rushing upside with him. He's a big, strong, physical guy, and you're definitely going to get some rushing touchdowns with him, similarly to the way you did with Cam Newton in his time at Carolina when he was early in his career. So definitely there's going to be some value there. That's about as good as I've got on Anthony Richardson. Just again, not somebody that I'm in love with at this point. Landing spot will depend, obviously, for him. For me, 1 and 2, I think this is for a lot of folks right now. This is a toss-up. Obviously, I think they go 1 and 2 in the actual draft as well. And it's just going to be depending on whether you like the Houston Texans weapons or the Carolina Panthers weapons more and who goes to which spot. So for me, I have CJ Stroud at number 2 and Bryce Young at number 1. Again, I understand the nervous energy that surrounds Bryce Young with his small stature. Obviously not weighing again at the pro day or the Alabama pro day after he weighed in at the combine. I do think that, with him being a little bit smaller size, that is going to make some folks nervous. But in a super flex draft or even a single quarterback draft, I think it should be Bryce Young and CJ Stroud that are for the first two names off the board. Again, I know there's a lot of people in the fantasy community that are hyping up Anthony Richardson and where they think he should be landing. But for me, it's still Bryce Young at number 1, and then CJ Stroud 2. So a real quick recap of the quarterbacks: Hendon Hooker 5, Will Levis 4, Anthony Richardson 3, CJ Stroud 2, Bryce Young at 1. Moving on into the running backs, again, we're waiting on word from Brant if we're going to get him back. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. I know he's trying to get back into the studio right now, so we will see how that progresses moving forward. Anyway, moving into the running backs, I think this one should be pretty clear-cut and dry for a lot of folks, at least at the top half. But as far as things go, there is always that thought process with these running backs that if the right guy falls to the right place, similarly to the Clyde Edwards-Helaire situation from a few years ago, these guys will move. Now, I want to preface that by saying nobody should leapfrog Bijan Robinson, regardless of where either of these players end up. I don't care if Bijan ends up behind Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, whoever else you think is the best running back in football, CMC, whatever. If Bijan's drafted, Bijan should be the 101 in a non-superflex league in my mind. And even if you get a guy like Tucker out of Syracuse who ends up drafted to an amazing landing spot, and you're like, oh my God, I love it, don't draft him before Bijan. We'll have a lot of people that are very upset, just like they were with the CMC, or excuse me, the CEH letdown that was, if you will. So for me, at running backs, let's start at number 5. This is a guy that I've been kind of infatuated with for a few years here. If Brant was here, he would tell you that this is my guy for sure. Definitely a guy that I've been interested in as far as wanting to get him on some teams in my dynasty leagues that I own stake in. And I just don't know if it's going to happen for me this year, again, because of where he's going to get drafted and where I hold draft picks at. But there's a lot of leagues out there. We'll see what happens. Number 5, I have Tank Bigsby out of Auburn, just a bruising back. And who doesn't want to be able to do some kind of a name for your fantasy team with the word tank in it? I mean, it sounds fantasy football, manly. It's all the things that we look for when it comes to fantasy football. And number 4, I've got Devin H.A., the running back out of Texas A&M. This guy is a electric pass catcher, definitely a very shifty running back. This guy could be very, very fun for PPR formats. And then at number 3, I have Zach Charbonnet, the UCLA running back that Brant has admitted to being so infatuated with in the past. We'll see if Brant gets on board with the UCLA guy again this year. For number 2 and number 1, again, these ones shouldn't be any different for anybody else out there. If they are right now at this point, I just think you're just doing it to just have a sticking point, something to talk about. But number 2 is Jahmyr Gibbs, just an absolute tank of a human being as well. Was the best pass catcher on the Alabama roster this year. Definitely a very, very sound back that's going to be a 3-down role for him where he gets drafted, again, pending landing spot. And then the number one player in this class for offensive fantasy football relevancy is Bijan Robinson. This guy's just an absolute unit. He's going to come into the leagues, and honestly, it may be too early, and Brant's not here to hold me back, so I'll go ahead and say it, but this man may be the running back 1 in dynasty startup draft rankings by the time we get to the season, just depending on where he goes. There's a lot of landing spots out there that if Bijan Robinson ends up there, it's a home run, slam dunk, right home about it and forget it. So definitely excited to see where Bijan goes. Again, I have a couple 101s and some rookie drafts. I'm like just uber excited to add this dude to my teams and just be able to stare at my rosters with him sitting there. So again, 1 through 5 running back for me is Tank Bigsby, Devin Achane, Zach Charbonnet, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson. Um, Moving on into the wide receiver thing or wide receiver rankings, I think this is the one where Brant and I would have been a lot different at here. So obviously, again, without having him here to see where I'm different than him. At number 5, I have Jalen Hyatt. Again, a guy who was it Hendon Hooker or was it Jalen Hyatt? The wheels were there. He's got a 6-foot tall frame. 4.40 at the combine. Definitely just the numbers are what you want for a wide receiver. I'm not sure he gets into the first round with some of these other guys as far as draft capital, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Look at a guy like Christian Watson, where he was drafted with Green Bay. Didn't start the season off very well, but definitely ended it well. So there's definitely some value outside of the first round in the NFL draft as well. Number 4, I have Zay Flowers from Boston College. This kid is electric as well. Potentially maybe the best route runner in this class. There were some videos and some pictures of this guy. He definitely bulked up big time, just absolutely shredded to prepare for the combine and getting ready for draft season. This guy is the type of wide receiver that if he goes someplace, there's definitely going to be some fantasy aspect. If he goes to some place like Kansas City, I could see him leapfrogging into the top 3 if one of those bigger names falls someplace that it isn't as a desirable landing spot. For me at number 3, I have Devin Johnston, the absolute behemoth of a human being from TCU. Again, with this guy, there's issues with body catching, not using his size to his advantage. But again, the right landing spot, and it may not matter. Number 2, I have Jordan Addison from USC. Again, these top the 2 and 3 for me really could fluctuate. 2, 3, and 4. I like Zay Flowers a little bit more than most do, probably. But these guys could all move and jockey for position just depending on, where they're drafted. So the one that I don't expect to move much for me is Jackson Smith-Njigba. He was my favorite wide receiver when we initially started breaking down this class, and I've seen nothing to make me think differently or feel differently. I still the question I get into and where I want to see things is as the draft season starts unfolding, do people value Jahmyr Gibbs more than Jackson Smith-Njigba? And I think the way that the fantasy landscape is shifting is it seems that wide receivers have longer shelf lives. They're more capable of those 20-point plus weeks routinely. And we really are going to that running back by committee landscape, if you will. So Jackson Smith-Njigba, it's going to be really interesting to me to see if he leapfrogs Jahmyr Gibbs in overall rankings, or if he stays at 3 where I have him currently behind Jahmyr. Again, in non-super flex leagues there. Now, quick recap of 1 through 5. Jalen Hyatt at 5, Zay Flowers 4, Kevin Johnston 3, Jordan Addison 2, and last but not least, Jackson Smith-Njigba at number 1. Now, moving on over to the tight end position. For those folks of you who play in tight end premium leagues, I know those are getting to be a big deal. This is a deep class in tight end in this rookie class, so definitely some hidden gems and some value here. Again, depending on landing spot. So at number 5 for me, I have Darnell Washington, the combine champ, if you will, very similarly to Anthony Richardson, just kind of coming in there as a man among boys, throwing the sled around, making things look easy, running an unreal 40 time, just an absolute freak athlete. Darnell Washington is going to be a lot of fun in the NFL. But for right now, I have him at number 5 just because the tape doesn't stand out as well as some of these other guys do. At number 4, I have Sam Laporta, the tight end out of Iowa. Again, the predecessing tight ends that have made it to the NFL from Iowa kind of led the path or paved the way for Sam Laporta. Again, I think there's a chance that Sam Laporta may have the best route running ability out of this tight end class. I won't go as far as to say he is the best, obviously, with me having him at number 4. But again, the right landing spot for any of these guys, and they're going to jockey so much just because they're so comparable. A lot of these guys in skill and ability and flashiness and whatnot. So these rankings will all change. This is part of the reason why I don't necessarily like doing these this early in the season. At number 3, I have Michael Mayer, the tight end out of Notre Dame. This is one of Brant's favorite players in this draft as a Notre Dame fan. So I know he'd be, if he was here with us right now, he'd be trying to slap me through the screen for having Michael Mayer as low as I do. But I can't take him out of the top 3 at this point. But for me to move him up any higher, I would just have to see, again, a super wonderful landing spot with great draft capital. Just not something I'm super sold on at this point with him. There was a lot of times in Notre Dame where it kind of almost looked like he was loafing it and it wasn't going 100% if the ball wasn't coming his way, which it did come his way an awful lot at Notre Dame, just simply due to the lack of other weapons. At number 2, I have Luke Musgrave, the Oregon State tight end. Again, this guy may have the best hands in the class. This guy is going to be a red zone monster in the NFL. I think this may be one of the better tight end classes we've seen in recent years here. And again, tight end premium. These guys are going to go early and often because they are so talented. These are guys that come in and make immediate impacts. Now, obviously, none of these guys are going to have the hype that Kyle Pitts had a few years ago, but that also hasn't worked out really well. And as a Falcons fan, I feel that. But nonetheless, there's just too much talent here. And at number 1, I think that a lot of folks are familiar with this name at this point, but if you're not, you may want to go look him up. Dalton Kincaid. He may be one of the more sure things in this class as far as fantasy relevancy outside of those top 3 names in Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson. Dalton Kincaid could be landing spot protected, if you will. It's not going to matter where he goes just because I think he doesn't have the best hands in the class, but they're right there. He doesn't have the best route running in the class, but it's right there. He isn't the best blocker in the class, but it's right there. He has the most hustle in the class. Doesn't have the best athleticism in the class, but it's right there. He's right there in all of the things. So if there's a 1A to any of these things, he's the one B in every one of them. He's just so well-rounded. Definitely a guy that is going to be a household name in just a few short years in the NFL. So again, recap on the tight ends: Darnell Washington out of Georgia, Sam Laporta out of Iowa, Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame, Luke Musgrave out of Oregon State, and Dalton Kincaid out of Utah. So that rounds out the top 5 at each position for me. Obviously, Brant, we had some technical difficulties, lost him early. I apologize for that. For you folks listening in, we will try to do better about that next week, and we will try to also get my rankings and Brant's rankings posted, so you can go compare and contrast those due to the fact that he wasn't able to be with us for all of that episode tonight. So again, thanks for tuning in, guys. Hopefully, like I said, next week that internet issue of Brant's is worked out, and we'll be back to giving you good content where you can see the two of us make fun of each other and do what it is that makes the Fatboyz the Fatboyz. So signing off as a solo here this time. Stay hungry and stay fat, my